Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas. Their ongoing study in the book on Being a Christian by Hans Kuhn, published in 1976. We're going to continue on with some very positive content. We're going to continue on with Christology. We're going to take a look at pages 133 to 144, continuing in part 3 of the book. We'll look at the movement beyond secularism, the concrete meaning of life, and beyond rational consciousness. Let's begin with block 1. And we're told that charismatic Jesus movements have always existed, appealing to the original true Christ. In antiquity, they were apocalyptic enthusiasts. In modern times, there have been various revival movements. And finally, there was the Pentecostal movement. There has been a concrete shift toward interiority. Initially, there was talk leading to secularism and secularity, but now secularity has shifted toward religiosity, toward religious interiority. And action has transitioned to an emphasis on meditation, from rationality to sensitivity, meditative sensitivity. Therefore, theoretical, charismatic enthusiasm and a shift toward interiority equals a new movement beyond secularism. A new movement beyond secularism. It's a protest against the domesticated Christ, against consumer-oriented society, against techno-manipulated world. A search for true meaning to life. And, as Professor Kuhn tells us, a birth of an entirely different type of consciousness. So we're looking at Christology in the face of the birth of a different kind of consciousness. It's a rising up to liberation, a new determination of values, a quest for the new man. Christianity in Jesus is seen as an opportunity for overcoming human paralysis, a chance to create fresh possibilities within Christianity, beyond secularism. Fresh possibilities beyond secularism. So theoretically, we're looking at this Christology as a movement beyond secularism. On the concrete side, we address the meaning of life in block 2. So in block 2, Jesus is seen as victim, abused by everyone. That's the new, freshly relevant interpretation. He's seen as a symbol for true life, a new expression for the longing of humanity. Life demands another kind of inwardness, another kind of self-consciousness. Desire for meaning of life cannot be suppressed. It never will be completely suppressed. So Christ as another kind of inwardness. Christianity is more than simply any kind of new charismatic intoxication. Christ is not superstar, not a musical to be composed and staged. We cannot mix everything together for Christ last week. We seek the Christ of piety, the Christ beyond conceptual dogmatism, the Christ beyond charismatic enthusiasm. Instead, we're drawn to a super rational consciousness. In other words, a consciousness beyond concept. A consciousness beyond concept. And we discussed that in the last lesson, that our Christology has to be a Christology beyond concept. That divine hypostasis is a doctrine beyond concept. So we get that affirmed again here. It is affirmed again here. So if you look at block 2, note 3, the conclusion, Christ as freshly relevant, and Christ as another inwardness equals the Christ of a super-rational consciousness. The story of Christ is strong enough to shine out of its own light through literature like Dostoevsky, who stated, "I prefer to stay with Christ after his release from prison." And we're going to find as we go on here that Professor Kuhn must have minored in English literature along with studies in religion and theology, because he has a great recognition of the importance of literary work in this particular lesson. And I agree with him. Dostoevsky wrote beautiful Christian allegorical material, so I'm very much in agreement with him taking up Dostoevsky. And this literary approach is called a modest approach of unique reverence. Literary approach to Christ is described by Professor Kuhn as a modest approach of unique reverence. So, Block 2, Note 4, Christology as a modest approach in unique reverence. The portrayal of Jesus as historical is past. All of that quest for the historical Jesus is past. Literature has provided the poetic counterpart to the quest for the historical Jesus, which was posited by the liberals in the early 20th century. The Gospels do not provide anything like a biography. Divine and human elements are brought together in a concrete person of Jesus as Christ. Again, he's affirming the doctrine of divine hypostasis. And divine hypostasis is not approached biographically. It can be approached, Christ can be approached poetically. Remember, we had to, in a previous lesson, he said we must differentiate between the poetic and the real. But that doesn't mean we ignore the poetic, but we do differentiate. We do gain from the poetic, and we gain from the real. Both interpretations of Christ are needed, poetic and real. So it gives us a powerful theoretical look in Block 1 that our theoretical Christology is a movement beyond secularism, a movement beyond secularity. Concretely, it means we take up a Christology beyond concept, which he calls super-rational consciousness. And so he describes the literary approach, the poetic approach, as a modest approach in unique reverence. Now we can really take a look at the conclusion to this lesson, and he ends it beautifully. He ends it with a Christology as beyond concept. Block 3, beyond rational consciousness. Under literary form, today there are few literary works where Christ is the central focus. Most literary work addresses the specific aspects of Jesus' life, passion, crucifixion, resurrection, especially in poetry and in short story form. They open up a literary reflection. And he's affirming that as those trying to write Christology, we need literary reflective work. Christ is reflected in the persons concerned with him. Reflection in persons concerned with Christ in literary work. In Hemingway, Christ is seen through the three soldiers who crucified him. In Borkert, Christ is seen through the soldier in charge of graves. In Dostoevsky, Christ is presented through the theme of the returning Jesus, and his grand inquisitor asks, "Why do you come to hinder us?" But Professor Kuhn brings this lesson together beautifully in Block 3, Note 3, 4, and 5. Block 3, Note 3, 4, and 5. The conclusion and the powerful, powerful conclusion to all that is offered in this lesson. Christ in literary form and Christ as personal reflection equals the poetic Christ, in search of the real Christ. We do have a need for the poetic Christ. We need that poetic reflection. We desperately need the contribution of poetic reflection. Dostoevsky's The Idiot presents Holbein's crucified Christ and the saying, "That picture might make some people lose their faith," which reveals the concealed pattern of a person. The gospel never left Dostoevsky's side after his release from prison, and the brothers Karamazov, he quotes, "If a grain that falls to the ground does not die, it remains alone, but if it dies, it yields much fruit." So literary work gives us Christ as a revealer of the concealed pattern of a person. Dostoevsky says that his Christ has passed through the purgatory of doubt. That's key. For Dostoevsky, his Christ has passed through the purgatory of doubt. And although Professor Kuhn mentions other literary works by Dostoevsky, for me, Crime and Punishment is the Christian allegory that I really identify with and appreciate. And if you ever get the chance, Crime and Punishment is available on YouTube as a movie starring Peter Lorre. Just type in the search bar Crime and Punishment, Peter Lorre. You'll find that movie. And it is a beautiful Christian allegory by Dostoevsky. And the characters reflect not only his poetic interpretation of Christ, but also a poetic representation of his own purgatory of doubt before reaching Christ. So there's a great deal that I agree with here by Professor Kuhn. I believe that Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment was a profound work of literary work centered on Christ, centered on redemption, and redemption that confronts someone going through the purgatory of doubt. Peter Lorre in Crime and Punishment is going through the purgatory of doubt. He's also going through the purgatory of guilt, having committed murder. And the prostitute, who represents Christ, brings redemption to him, brings introspection to him, and reads the section of Scripture on the raising of Lazarus to proclaim to him that Christ can give spiritual life to those who are spiritually dead. So it's a beautiful literary work. I recommend it highly. But so I agree with Professor Kuhn here. He says that Christ, as the revealer of the concealed pattern of a person, Dostoevsky passed through the purgatory of doubt. Jesus represents human existence lived and endured. Jesus is key point of our existence. Christ has become Jesus, God, antithesis. Jesus as man and God as incomprehensible. That's his closing statement. From poetic reflection, we are shown a dialectic of Block 3, Note 5, Jesus as man and God as incomprehensible. Literary work helps us to understand the Jesus event. Notice he says Jesus event, not Christ event. Freshly interpreting the event in language and image, allowing us to take the outsider's viewpoint, to bring out the inexplicable in the commonplace. So he's saying our Christology, any theologian wanting to write Christology, needs the contribution of literary poetic work. It gives us a fresh interpretation of Jesus' event as we try to write our Christology. So this lesson is all about the poetic side, and our next lesson is going to be about the real side. And he said we must differentiate between poetry and the real. So this lesson centered exclusively on the poetic contribution to Christology. Our next lesson will concentrate on the real contribution to Christology. But it's all about dealing with the positing of divine hypostasis that is beyond concept. We're dealing with what he said last time is a positing of divine hypostasis. And we don't fully understand that mysterion, mystery. We don't fully comprehend it. Because it is beyond concept, we need poetic help. We need contribution from literary poetic work. His own preference, and a preference I agree with, is Dostoevsky. So that's going to wrap up pages 133 to 144. And the next lesson we will take a look at Christology and the realm of the real.